Hello, vinyl community. This is Tommy in North Carolina, and I would like to close out 2018 with a video about something that I talked about in my previous video. We're going to talk about the White Album by the Beatles. And so I'm going to talk about specifically the new version. I know there's a lot of videos out there, so I'm just going to give my thoughts on it, a little bit of an overview, and just a little bit, but I also want to give a point of reference. I have a few versions of the White Album. I have this, which is not a numbered edition, but it is an embossed cover. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's white. Actually in pretty decent shape. Apple label. I think this is probably from the early 70s, maybe. Like I said, not an original. Also one that I picked up probably about a year ago. This is a 70s pressing. It's the white vinyl, purple label, capital, which I got it because I heard that it was a very good sounding. It's got all the inserts. It's got the poster as well as the 4 photos in there. Probably the best sounding stereo copy that I had owned was this one. Also, the mono reissue that came out, was it 2014 when these monos came out, which was probably the best sounding version of the White Album that I had. So, kind of interesting. It's got the number down there, but this is the mono. And recently, the deluxe 4-record set with the Easter demos included. 2 LPs, White Album remastered for 2018 by Giles Martin, as well as the Easter demos, the acoustic demos that were recorded at George's house. And I also got the deluxe box set with the 6-disc as well as the Blu-ray, and I have listened to all of it. So that's the point of reference. I also have just a little bit of background. I have the original. I bought it on cassette back in the early 90s, late 80s. I also had the original CD, 2-disc. It actually was the CD with the white. It was put together. It wasn't 2 separate discs, but with the white binding or the white case, if you know what I'm talking about. Also bought the 1998 30th anniversary reissue that came out in 98. That I don't know that there was any sound upgrade, but it was what it was. And then finally, I bought the 2009 CD. And as well as the mono CD. So I've got several White Albums. So let me give you a little bit of background about my history with the Beatles, with the White Album in particular. My dad had the Hey Jude album, and some of this has been discussed in previous videos, so I'm not going to go into great detail. But the famous story, and if you go back, there's a video, and I may put the link down there in the description where I talk about it. But my mom and my sister and myself went on a little family getaway, and we hung out with a friend of my mom's, Carol, who had a pretty good Beatles collection. They lived in the right on the Tennessee, Alabama state line. So we spent about a week up there in the summer, and I got into her record collection. And this was like early high school. I think, in between my 9th and 10th grade year. And so I was about 14, 15 years old. And she had the Blue Album, 1967 through 1970, which I bought and absolutely fell in love with it. I just could not get enough of that music. I was just playing it over and over and over. And she had other Beatles albums, Rubber Soul in particular, and a lot of the early stuff. And I kind of glanced over those, but I kept going back to that Blue Album, and it was like, it just was so ingrained in me. As soon as we got back home from that trip, I had some money left over from the trip that I went immediately and bought a cassette. I did not have a CD player at the time, bought a cassette copy of 1967 through 70. So I bought that. Now this is probably around 1990, I'm thinking. So the internet, not really a thing. So there wasn't a lot of just Beatles information for me to just absorb and consume. So I was really hearing everything. I was appreciating everything on a musical level. Way past the sort of prime of the Beatles. I knew who they were. I knew they were a big deal. But like I said, that particular album was just mind-blowing. And so I didn't really have a point of context or anything about it. I just knew that this was the later period before they broke up. But I didn't know what any of the albums they were from or anything like that. And so the next little bit of money I was able to save up, I went to the record store and I bought a cassette tape, The Beatles Part 1 and 2. It was a 2 cassette thing. And I had no clue what it was because if you remember the original cassette tapes of the Beatles, and I don't have it out and I can't show you guys, but it didn't say the White Album and it just said The Beatles Part 1 and 2. It was a 2 cassette thing, but the cover of the cassette said the Beatles, but it had the 4 photographs that came in the collection, the 4 little, but they were black and white, and so they were put on these, and I think it had a blue spine on it, and so there was no, I didn't know what the White Album was. I didn't know anything about, I just knew I was buying a 2 cassette Beatles thing. As far as I knew, this was another compilation. And so I listened to it and I remember thinking, this is really weird. This is the weird Beatles stuff. Glass Onion. Everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey. Helter Skelter. Happiness is a Warm Gun. In Rocky Raccoon. There were all these sort of Bungalow Bill, these sort of characters and songs that were really kind of strange and foreign. And I thought, this is the weird Beatles thing, weird Beatles collection. It wasn't until later that I discovered, this is the White Album. And I don't remember it being a great revelation. Like, I don't remember thinking, boom, it's the White Album. I've been listening to it all along. I just remember sort of taking it as it was. And so it was just another collection of Beatles music for me that I was enjoying. And so I always kind of went back to the White Album in a short answer when anybody would find out that I was a Beatles fan. Of course, as my knowledge and my experience with the Beatles grew, Sgt. Pepper became a thing, and then I later learned to appreciate Revolver, Rubber Soul, and those albums. And so it all kind of came to me at that point as I got older and began to learn more about this music. But I always would go to the White Album as sort of a favorite, and it was sort of cheating because it's 30 songs, 2 discs, a lot of music, and a lot of styles. To me, this was the great bridge between the sort of crazy Sgt. Pepper, whatever that is, to the more basic sort of rock and roll kind of sounds. And this album kind of summed it up. It had that sort of whimsical quality with songs like Rocky Raccoon, Happiness is a Warm Gun, but it also had stuff that was more sort of basic and sort of direct in its approach. And so I always appreciated it. But I discovered as my ears became more refined that the album was never really one of the better sounding Beatles albums. And I found out later why, because it was recorded in different places, kind of all over the place. They were upgrading to 8-track, and so the recordings themselves were they weren't the best in the terms of sonically, the quality wasn't the best out there. And so I wrestled with buying vinyl copies. And I bought the mono because I knew that was a good one. And then when I found that white pressing, I knew that was a preferred. I just put off buying it because if I was going to spend the money to have the White Album, I wanted it to sound really, really good. So imagine my delight and surprise when they announced that they were going to do a 50th anniversary, much like the Pepper, and that it was going to be remixed and repackaged and all the good things. And so that immediately went on my Christmas list, and fortunately I was able to get a copy. And then over the weekend, this past weekend, I was able to finally absorb those albums and listen to them. I listened to the vinyl first all the way through, and then went through the CDs and listened to the Blu-ray, the 5.1 mix. And so I can say this: it definitely is an upgrade sonically. It's more cohesive. A lot of the rockin' songs, they have a little more punch and a little more kick. The bass drum on "Everybody's Got Something to Hide," except for Me and My Monkey, just comes right out of the speaker. Now I know there's been a lot of criticisms that the bass is a little too bassy. And I went and looked at a few YouTube videos, and no offense to anyone that's doing, I'm not calling anyone out here, but the couple of YouTube videos that I saw where they tried to compare the different ones, it did sound bassier. The new mix sounded way bassier, but on my system at home, cranked up, it's just the right amount to me. It's not that it sounded. It didn't sound as good to me from the videos that I watched, and I was watching not on my phone, but upstairs with the TV with the sound hooked up. So, not sure how that translates. But if you're watching any of those videos where they're making the comparison and you're kind of being turned off by the bassiness, I might say don't judge it based on that, because what I heard didn't really come through. Now it was interesting with this because the White Album is so different than Pepper. I think with Pepper they had a template in that if you go back and watch my video on that reissue, they sort of, the mono mix of Sgt. Pepper was always sort of the preferred mix, the one everybody, the fans and everybody sort of referred to. That's the real version. So I think when they remixed that, they used that mono mix as sort of the basis of where they were going to go. And of course it is a stereo mix, and it's been expanded, and it sounds like a 3D mono almost. So the recording has more depth. This album, and from what I understand, Giles Martin was wanting it to sound more contemporary. I don't know about that. And songs like Blackbird and I Will, Julia, some of the more soft acoustic songs, they definitely have more range. There's more depth to those songs. But I don't know that they sound necessarily contemporary, but I don't necessarily want the Beatles to sound contemporary. I know that George Harrison made a remark, I think in the Making of Sgt. Pepper documentary back in the 90s, that one of the reasons you listen to some of the older records is because you're interested in the microphones and the way that they sound and the way that they were recorded, and so that's part of the interest. I think the same holds true for any Beatles thing that you listen to. It's all part of sort of a time capsule, or all part of kind of the whole experience of how it was recorded and the way in which it was done. And there's a fascination to be sort of understood from that. But I think this version is more cohesive in that I went back and I A-B'd sort of the 2009 stereo to the 2018 new mix. And one of the things that I noticed about it was that not only is there more depth and presence in the newer recordings, but the sort of that 2009 mix sounded to me a bit harsher. Songs like Sexy Sadie, they had a lot of like top end sort of hiss to it, if that makes sense. And so these new ones kind of take that off, shave that off, and like I said, add more sort of bottom, more bass. I don't know. I want to be careful about using the bass description, because I feel like to say it's too bassy or there's a lot of bass makes it sound like it's just really boomy, and it's not that. But I think it jumps out of the speakers. A good example is Dear Prudence. The guitars in Dear Prudence, just the EQ on those are just phenomenal. The way the guitar sounds, it's just it's a very fresh approach. And so I know people are mixed about remixing the Beatles. I have a feeling that this, kind of like the Pepper, I think is going to become the standard. This is the way the White Album is going to be from now on. So hold on to your old copies. But I'll be honest, I see myself very rarely ever putting these on compared to the new one. I think when I go to listen to the White Album, it's probably going to be to hear the new one. Now the deluxe set, the Blu-ray mix is really nice. Like I said, I sat and listened to it, and it's not like this heavy 5.1, but you can hear sort of the rattling, the sort of tack piano, honky tonk piano, and Rocky Raccoon is kind of coming from the rear speakers, kind of looming over the proceedings. And so it's not, I wouldn't say it's essential by any means, because I mean, who's going to be able to listen to those mixes on a regular basis? But it is interesting. Now, another one that I want to point out is Revolution 9, which is the sound collage. People are very mixed about it. The 5.1 mix is really, really wild. Probably the most just outright noticeable experience as far as having the surround quality to it. So if you don't listen to anything else on that disc, that'd be the one to go to. Now, I don't want to get into the arguments on the White Album, single disc, double disc. I love the White Album for what it is, for all of its flaws. When anyone makes that argument, I always point to the song Not Guilty by George Harrison, which they clearly worked on, made a mix of it. It was fine in its form as it was, and then it, for some reason, just got cut completely from the proceedings. And I always wonder, cut in favor of what? Wild Honey Pie, or Why Don't We Do It in the Road? There's a lot of ego on that album, and so I don't want to get into that. I enjoy it for what it is. Revolution 9, all of it. It's the White Album. It's iconic and all of that stuff. Now, if there's any faults to the new deluxe set, which, like I said, I'm nitpicking at this point. It might be that with the Sgt. Pepper, with the deluxe and the remix, they included Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, and I know there was a lot of debate about that they were going to put it back on the album or whatever. But it would have been nice to sort of fill in those gaps of those songs, Hey Jude and Revolution, the single in particular, to have those remixed and put in there. And I might even argue some of the other stuff, like some of the like Hey Bulldog and some of the stuff that was floating around at that time. Now, the box set does sort of make a big deal about the fact that the White Album is the proper follow-up to Sgt. Pepper. That is what the Beatles were intending to be, the follow-up, and so there's a little bit of that going on with the notes in the book. But it's fine. I think that's true. I wonder if the Beatles were in the studio saying, we're following up Pepper, this is what we're going to do. Because there's so much stuff that was recorded between Pepper and the White Album that it's hard for me to sort of wrap my mind around that, they were conscientiously sort of saying this is our true follow-up to Pepper. Maybe they were, and I'm not saying anyone is not telling the truth in the liner notes there. Just fascinating stuff. And so it's really cool. So if you don't have them, I give it a hearty thumbs up. I think the mixes are nice. I think your ears are going to really appreciate the way it sounds. There is a great sort of cohesiveness to it now. It all flows together really well. And I'm not going to get rid of or burn my other copies, not yet anyway, but that's the collector in me. But I will say that there's probably no other reason to listen to these older White Albums anymore, with the exception of just maybe as a point of reference. If someone's ever down here and I say, okay, well, here's what the old one sounds like, here's what the new one sounds like. But I think the new one's going to be my go-to. Very, very, very good. A must for Beatles fans. I mean, you can get the standard, I think, 3-disc version with the Esher demos included. The Esher demos are I've heard them before. They've been bootlegged for a long time. So I don't really have a whole lot to add to that. You just get to hear those songs in their sort of embryonic states as they were being written. I wouldn't say it's essential listening. I know a lot of people are, it's the Beatles unplugged. I don't know about that, because I don't really get the sense of it being sort of a group thing. I think it was just them sort of running through the songs they had written in Rishikesh. So fascinating listening for Beatles fans, but I don't know if it's necessarily essential, by no means. The session stuff, the outtake stuff, definitely a lot of fun. One of the things that kind of blew me away was an early version, and I'm not gonna give any spoilers here. It was an early version of a song that was later done. I didn't know it was floating around at that point. So when you hear it, you'll understand what I mean. But again, always fascinating to hear Beatle outtakes and some of those songs. So the White Album reissued 2018, fantastic. I give it a big thumbs up. And what do you think? Let me know. Comment down below. Have you heard it? Is it terrible? Do you think I'm completely off my rocker? So just like I said, comment. Give the video a good old thumbs up, like, share. You know the routine. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's TommyBurton75. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you again very soon.